So right at the beginning of the 5th chapter of Yevamot, the sages say, Yesh get achar get, you can give a get after a get, ve'achar ma'amar, and you can maybe give a get after a ma'amar, aval lo achar be'ilah ve'lo achar chalitza klo. So the status of a get and a ma'amar is rabbinic, and we're not quite sure whether it has full power. So you can give a get after it. But after the act of sexual intercourse or of a chalitza, you can't do anything. Those are definitive acts. And that is because the status, the Yevamot, the widow who requires levirate marriage, is tied to her brother-in-law by the death of her husband. And that tie is broken either by giving chalitza, by formal release, as is prescribed in the Torah, or by consummation of the levirate marriage. And the rabbis prescribe this process of ma'amar, this betrothal, because they're not that happy actually with essentially a legal act being sort of determined by just consummating the marriage. So they prescribe the ma'amar, but underneath the ma'amar, the legal act is actually performed by consummating the marriage. And in the rest of the 5th chapter of Yevamot, the Mishnah gives all kinds of different examples where there are peculiar combinations of get and ma'amar, and sometimes with sexual intercourse and sometimes with chalitza. And that's where we're going to get to in the 3rd Mishnah. Natan get v'asaba ma'amar. So maybe he gave her a get. So we're talking about a man who's got one shomeret yavam, one widow who's waiting for yibbum. He gives her a get. He doesn't intend to perform yibbum. He's going to perform chalitz. He gives her a get. Natan get. Ve'asava ma'amar. But then he gives her ma'amar. He declares he's going to perform yibbum. What happens next? Tzricha gate v'chalitza. She needs a gate and she needs chalitza. She needs a get to dissolve the ma'amar, and she needs chalitza because, well, we've said in the 1st Mishnah that the only definitive act of dissolution is chalitza. If we're going to dissolve this bond, at some point we need to perform chalitza. Natan get uval. Maybe he gave her a get. Uval, and then he had sexual intercourse with her. Now, what are we going to do here? Because he's already given her a get, and the rabbis are going to say that to a certain extent, the bond of yibbum, this bond of levirate marriage, has been broken by giving her that get. So the act of sexual intercourse, it doesn't complete the yibbum. It's licentious. It's not part of the plot. It's not part of the plot. And so the Mishnah goes on to say, tzricha gate v'chalitza. She needs a gate and a chalitza. She needs a get to so we've said that the act of sexual intercourse isn't definitive, but perhaps that the get is only rabbinic anyway. Maybe it is definitive. It's an ambivalent situation. It's an ambivalent situation. So she needs the get to dissolve any bond that the intercourse had created, but she still needs chalitza because we can't finally dissolve this bond without chalitza. Natan get b'chalatz. Okay, he gave her a get and then he did chalitza. And this is the proper thing to do. Ein achar chalitza klum. After chalitza, that's it. You don't have to do anything else. The bond has been dissolved. And now the Mishnah will go through all of these examples the other way around. So chalatz, so he did chalitza. Ve'asa ma'amar, and then he did chalitza, but after he did chalitza, he did ma'amar, ve'asa ma'amar. Or perhaps natan get, he gave a get. Or perhaps uval, and perhaps he had intercourse with her. And in a parallel string of incidents. Or maybe the other way around is, rather than giving chalitza before doing all these things. He had intercourse before doing all these things. Or Baal, he had intercourse with her. Ve'asa ma'amar. And then he did ma'amar, natan get, or he gave her a get, or did chalitza. Ve'ein achar chalitza klum. There's no, after chalitza, there's no other legal act has any significance. Echad yevamah ve'echad yevamah achat ve'echad shtei yevamot. It doesn't make any difference whether there's just one yevamah or two yevamot. The status is exactly the same. And the text of the Mishnah at this point is a bit unclear. I mean, we understand that if he did chalitza, then none of these acts afterwards have any significance at all. Chalatz, if he did chalitza and then did ma'amar or gave her a get or had intercourse with her, none of these acts have any significance because he's done chalitza. He's dissolved the bond. The bond of yibbum no longer exists. And we don't understand why the Mishnah then goes on to say, or on the other hand, maybe he had intercourse with her, ve'asa ma'amar natan get ve'chalatz. He had intercourse with her, and then he did a ma'amar, and then he gave her a get, and then he gave her chalitza. It may be, and one of the commentators hints that maybe the Mishnah doesn't actually want to say, but it does mean just as after chalitza, no other legal act has any significance. Similarly, after intercourse, no other legal act has any significance. I think that may be what the Mishnah is saying here. And it's going to draw these out in more examples in the next Mishnah, but this time with two Yevamot. So this is the situation that we talked about yesterday. Alex dies, he has two wives. And we can even look at the picture on the source sheet. Alex dies, he has two wives. So Bob has possible relationships of yibbum with both of these wives. And of course, he doesn't need to carry out yibbum or chalitza with both of them. As soon as he either cements the bond with one of them by doing yibbum, or dissolve the bond by doing chalitza, the other one is freed. But until he either cements or dissolves that bond, they are both in some way caught up with him. Alice and Betsy, if these are the two wives of Alex, are both in some way connected to Bob. And the Mishnah is now going to discuss how this might play out in the situation where there's not one but two Yevamot. And it begins by asking, Kate Sud, how does it work? So he did ma'amar with this one and ma'amar with the other one. In other words, he gave both of them ma'amar. This is a classic question that we looked at in the first Mishnah of the fifth chapter. Is there ma'amar after ma'amar? Can you do a ma'amar with two wives? And the Mishnah says, tzrichot shnei gitin b'chalitza. They need two gitin. They each need a get. He can't contract yibbum now with either one of them because he's connected to both of them. They both need a get. And then, of course, he has to perform chalitza with one of them in order to dissolve the bond. What about ma'amar with one and intercourse with the other? Ma'amar b'zor uval lazor. So he agreed to do yibbum with one, and he had intercourse with the other. Tzrichot shnei gitim b'chalitza. They need two gitim, and they need chalitza. It's the same situation, if you like, as the first one. And the act of intercourse in this case doesn't have legal weight because he is connected to the other wife. So he has to give them both a get and chalitza. Ma'amar v'zor v'get l'zor. Maybe he gives ma'amar to one and get to the other. Tzricha get v'chalitza. So one of them. So the second one needs the one who doesn't have a get needs a get, and one of them has to carry out chalitza again because in order to dissolve this bond, we need chalitza. Ma'amar b'zor v'chalatz l'zor. Maybe he did ma'amar with one and chalitza with the other. You see, we're going through successively all the possible options. The Mishnah is being quite mathematical about this. So it's exhaustingly going through all the options that could happen if he did ma'amar with one, and what else could happen with the other. So the final option is ma'amar b'zo v'chalatz lazo, or ma'amar with one, a chalitza with the other one. Rishonat tzricha get. So the first one needs a get. So the bond of yibbum is dissolved by the chalitza, but the first one who had the ma'amar but hasn't had chalitza, she needs a get to dissolve the original ma'amar. So those are the first four cases that the Mishnah is going to bring. In other words, the cases where the potential husband, the potential yibbum performs ma'amar with one of these wives and various other things with the other. And then the Mishnah reverses itself and it goes through all of these examples again. But this time, where instead of giving a ma'amar at the beginning, we're going to give a get at the beginning. So again, you can see that the Mishnah is exhaustively working through the possibilities. And so the second half of the Mishnah is a mirror image of the first half of the Mishnah, but it starts with get. So here we go. Get lazor, but get lazor. So one of them gets a get and the other gets a get. Tzrichot, himenu chalitza. They require chalitza. This doesn't mean they both require chalitza, but essentially one of them, they both require that one of them should have chalitza because the bond is not dissolved without chalitza. Get lazor uval lazor. He gave one a get and he had intercourse with the other. Tzricha gate v'chalitza. She actually requires a get and chalitza in order to free her up. Because the original get began to dissolve the bounds of yibbum completely. So the intercourse didn't have any legal significance. We need to unwind it. So we give the second one a get, and then we do chalitza. Get lazor uma'amar lazor. So he gave the first one a get, and he performed ma'amar with the second. Tzricha get v'chalitza. The second one requires a get and a chalitza for the same reason. Get lazor v'chalatz lazor. If he gave one a get and he gave chalitza to the other, ein achar chalitza klum. He's given a get to one, so he's dissolved that, rabbinically he's dissolved that bond. V'chalatz lazor, he's performed chalitza with the other. That's the proper thing to do. Ein achar chalitza klum. There's absolutely no further action required because he's both from a Torah point of view and both from a rabbinic point of view, he's dissolved both bonds.